his troubles and lighten his burden, she determined to ask Sal about this mysterious woman, and find out, if possible, what secret had been told to Brian which affected him so deeply. "Sal," she said, after a short pause, turning her clear grey eyes on the woman, "I want to ask you something." The other shivered and turned pale. About that?" Madge nodded. Sal hesitated for a moment, and then flung herself at the feet of her mistress. "I will tell you," she cried. "You have been kind to me, and have a right to know. I will tell you all I know." "Then," asked Madge, firmly, as she clasped her hands tightly together, "who was this woman whom Mr. Fitzgerald went to see, and where did she come from?" "Gran and me found her one evening in Little Bourke Street," answered Sal, "just near the theatre. She was quite drunk, and we took her home with us." "Oh, how kind of you," said Madge. "Oh, it wasn't that," replied the other dryly. "Gran wanted her clothes. She was awful swell dressed." "And she took the clothes. How wicked!" "Any one would have done it down our way," answered Sal, indifferently. "But Gran changed her mind when she got her home. I went out to get some gin for Gran, and when I got back she was a huggin' and a kissin' the woman." "She recognised her." "Yes, I s'pose so," replied Sal. "And next morning, when the lady got square, she made a grab at Gran and hollered out, 'I was comin' to see you.'" "And then?" "Gran chucked me out of the room, and they had a long jaw, and then when I come back, Gran tells me the lady is a goin' to stay with us 'cause she was ill, and sent me for Mr. Whyte." "And he came?" "Oh, yes, often," said Sal. "He kicked up a row when he first turned up, but when he found she was ill he sent a doctor, but it weren't no good. She was 2 weeks with us, and then died the mornin' she saw Mr. Fitzgerald." "I suppose Mr. Whyte was in the habit of talking to this woman?" "Lots," returned Sal, "but he always turned Gran and me out of the room afore he started." "And," hesitating, "did you ever overhear one of those conversations?" "Yes, one," answered the other, with a nod. "I got riled at the way he cleared us out of our own room, and once, when he shut the door and Gran went off to get some gin, I sat down at the door and listened. He wanted her to give up some papers, and she wouldn't. She said she'd die first, but at last he got 'em, and took 'em away with him." "Did you see them?" asked Madge, as the assertion of Gorby that Whyte had been murdered for certain papers flashed across her mind. "Rather," said Sal. "I was looking through a hole in the door, and she takes 'em from under her piller, and he takes 'em to the table, where the candle was, and looks at 'em. They were in a large blue envelope, with writing on it in red ink. Then he put 'em in his pocket, and she sings out, 'You'll lose 'em,' and he says, 'No, I'll always have 'em with me, and if he wants 'em he'll have to kill me fust afore he gets 'em.'" "And you did not know who the man was to whom the papers were of such importance?" "No, I didn't; they never said no names." "And when was it Whyte got the papers?" "About a week before he was murdered," said Sal, after a moment's thought. "And after that he never turned up again. She kept watchin' for him night and day, and 'cause he didn't come, got mad at him. I hear her sayin', 'You think you've done with me, my gentleman, and leaves me here to die, but I'll spoil your little game.' And then she wrote that letter to Mr. Fitzgerald, and I brought him to her, as you know." "Yes, yes," said Madge, rather impatiently. "I heard all that at the trial; but what conversation passed between Mr. Fitzgerald and this woman? Did you hear it?" "Bits of it," replied the other. "I didn't split in court, 'cause I thought the lawyer would be down on me for listening. The first thing I heard Mr. Fitzgerald sayin' was, 'You're mad, it ain't true,' and she says, 'S'elp me it is, Whyte's got the proof.' And then he sings out, 'My poor girl,' and she says, 'Will you marry her now?' and says he, 'I will, I love her more than ever.' And then she makes a grab at him, and says, 'Spoil his game if you can,' and says he, 'What's your name?' and she says—" "What?" asked Madge, breathlessly. "Rosanna Moore." There was a sharp exclamation as Sal said the name, and turning round quickly, Madge found Brian standing beside her, pale as death, with his eyes fixed on the woman, who had risen to her feet. "Go on," he said, sharply. "That's all I know," she replied, in a sullen tone. Brian gave a sigh of relief. "You can go," he said, slowly. "I wish to speak with Miss Frettlby alone." Sal looked at him for a moment, and then glanced at her mistress, who nodded to her as a sign that she might withdraw. She picked up her book, and with another sharp, inquiring look at Brian, turned and walked slowly into the house. CHAPTER 21. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.